you honestly believe that there's any chance that this bill will pass this Senate?
From my perspective, this is good policy. The evidence base for that has been made time and time again since, quite frankly, the Coal Royal Commission about 15 years ago now. The mere fact that we have 100 CFMEU officials on over 1,000 charges currently before the courts would indicate to me we absolutely do need to see the restoration of the ABCC. But, you know, it is up to each crossbencher to argue why they will support it, or in the event that they don't, why they won't support it. And again, the Prime Minister has made very clear today, this is an important part of our economic narrative. In the event that the bill does not pass, we will go to a double dissolution election on July the 2nd.
Somewhere in the middle of the night on Thursday, as it dragged into Friday, did you have a eureka moment where you thought, well, the Senate is giving us evidence of obstruction and game playing right here on the Senate voting law reform? Did that feed into government thinking about the need to move and to move swiftly? We're only 48, 72 hours.
You know, has been in a state of paralysis for some time now. The mere fact that we had an opportunity to debate the ABCC legislation several weeks ago, and yet it was referred off to a committee, again, a committee that we all knew what the outcome would be because it had already been to that committee before, would indicate to me that the Senate is in a state of paralysis, in particular when it comes to this legislation. In terms of the dysfunction of the Senate, I think you're right. It was on display, unfortunately, in particular with a number of the speeches that were given by the Labor Party on Thursday night and early into Friday morning. But in terms of this decision, my understanding is the Prime Minister made the decision last night, as he referred to in his press conference.
Yeah, just talk us through process. So he's come to that view, what, in isolation or after
well, again, you'd need to speak to the Prime Minister. But I would say that any prudent government would have considered all options, and certainly this clearly was an option, Section 5 of the Constitution. We really have no other options available to us. The Senate made it very clear on Friday that they would not support a motion to recall, and in fact an amendment was passed to the normal adjournment motion to lock in the 10th of May. So this was obviously the option left to the Prime Minister, and he is determined to get these pieces of legislation passed because they are an important part of our economic narrative. But more than that, Chris, we received an overwhelming mandate at the 2013 election. Let's not forget that. This is not new policy for this government. We took it to the 2013 election and the people of Australia, they voted for it.
We've heard from some other ministers that some members of the crossbench have refused to speak to them when it comes to their legislation. Is this an experience that you've had, or can you tell us what was it like dealing with this Senate crossbench? And in the end, do you think that there is actually no alternative for the government but to try and expunge it?
I have always had a reasonable relationship with the crossbenchers to the extent that I have been able to sit down with them. They have always been willing to sit down with me. But you're talking about 8 people with 8 fundamentally different objectives. And so whilst you might be able to say, have a conversation here and agree something, by the time you get to number 8, number 1 may have substantially changed. So it's not an easy process. It is a time-consuming process. And certainly to date, we have not managed to reach agreement on the Australian Building and Construction Commission legislation or the registered organisations, which, as you know, has been rejected by the Senate 3 times.
Yeah, why, by the way, is that coming back on if it's not necessary? Why is that being coupled up as...
Well, if the Senate were minded to pass the Australian Building and Construction Commission legislation, and as you articulated in your opening comments, the Prime Minister has made it quite clear to the Governor-General, in bringing back the Parliament for 3 weeks, his objective is to see the passage of 2 very good pieces of legislation. These are important economic, pictures for the government. So our intention, if the ABCC is passed, would be to work with the crossbench to then get the Registered Organisations Commission legislation passed.